Welcome to the Telos Care Podcast, where faith meets formation. Thanks for joining us today as we have conversations around biblical counseling and how to bring hope and healing to a hurting world.
Today I am with Noah Levitt, a mental health coach and a minister of the gospel, a personal worker with so many folks. And Noah, I'm just so glad to have a conversation with you. Noah is my friend, my colleague, and I am excited about this conversation because God has led Noah into areas of inner healing, deliverance, as well as mental health coaching. And so, Noah, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody about your ministry and what God has called you to do specifically?
Well, Tim, Dr. Lloyd, is absolutely an honor to be able to be with you on this podcast today. Thank you so much for having me on. It is a special honor because of your leadership, your example. That has been tremendous inspiration for me. Um, my journey into the space I'm in now, I basically started off, in college, learning about different tenets of the faith. I went to a Christian college in New York City, and basically I learned a lot about different forms of ministry, evangelism, but I never really had any background in mental health. I kind of avoided it for most of my life because I had so much trauma from my own childhood, and that really affected my upbringing. And so I in the process of growing, in the process of learning in college about theology, and also just how the human soul is it works, I ended up meeting a mentor of mine, a mentor that ended up really exposing me to this world of mental health, and he helped me to understand a lot of the trauma that I myself had suffered. And through the healing journey I went through, God began to reveal to me, Noah, I'm actually calling you to this world, but I don't want you to just do mental health ministry or coaching primarily just in through one lens, but I want you to also learn about the spiritual side of things as well. And so I began to learn about things like inner healing and deliverance ministry, and understanding how spiritual warfare also plays a factor in people's soul and people's well-being. And from there, after I graduated college, I started engaging in deliverance ministry, which I can share more about, inner healing ministry, and eventually mental health coaching. And so I recently launched a business a few weeks ago. And the business is basically, I offer mental health coaching in areas specifically of pornography, addiction recovery, and also anxiety and shame. And so those are kind of my focal areas. And I've just been doing it ever since, God started to deal with me back in college, and I love it.
I think that's wonderful, Noah. I find that the most anointed counselors, coaches, and ministers are often those who have gone through that personal journey themselves. They've found inner healing. They want to figure their own stuff out, and then that takes us and moves us to want to help somebody else. Because when God begins to do the work of healing in your life, and the lights click on, you realize I've got to share this with others, and the way
Absolutely.
you keep it is to give it away. And
Mm,
and I believe that you have to give it away. I believe that we have to engage others to help others. So you unpacked a lot. Let me ask a couple of questions about that journey. One, I come from the space of counseling from a clinical side, and then I am helping and training others from a biblical counseling perspective. But you're moving into mental health coaching and inner healing. Talk to me a little bit about the nuances and the differences of all of that.
yeah, no, that's a great question, Dr. Lloyd. And yeah, I think for me, when I think about counseling, I think about kind of two different lenses. So usually counseling focuses primarily on helping people to unpack the wounds, traumas, things of the past that are still afflicting them, keeping them in bondage, affecting their present. But coaching specifically targets the present and the future, focusing on helping them identify goals and areas that they want to achieve certain outcomes, and giving them a pathway forward that will help them eventually pursue those goals and see them fulfilled in their lives. And so inner healing, where that comes in all of this, is when you think about the ministry of Jesus in the Gospels, right? Jesus has a lot of encounters with different people where healing takes place, not just in the physical realm, but also in the emotional realm. And in these moments, like for example, the woman who had the issue of blood, right? She encounters Jesus. Jesus heals her from her physical infirmity, but he also heals her deeply emotionally because he calls her daughter, right? He identifies her based on her identity and restores something to her that would have been lost in the Jewish culture, where she would have been regarded as unclean, rejected, ostracized. And
That's
so
good.
when Jesus encounters people, often there's a deeper inner work of healing that takes place on the soulish level, even though often there's multiple layers of healing that take place.
That is good. That is powerful. That resonates deeply with me. I believe that we are a whole person. We are body, soul, and spirit, and I believe that the power of redemption touches deeply in all areas of our life, in the emotional realm, in the spiritual realm, in the physical realm. The healings that Jesus did in the New Testament, well, they're still happening now, and we're experiencing that. I think there's with such an awareness of mental health concerns that there is more and more of a focus on that, or a drift toward that, and I think it's actually a healthy thing, because I think for years people have been dismissing the mental health, like you did in your early ministry. We ignore it, and it begins to surface, and when it does surface, it's rather ugly, and we don't realize, that this is going on underneath, and we want help. And so there is where the inner healing can really be powerful. How do you connect that with deliverance, though?
Yes, it's a great question. So when we look at, for example, in Matthew chapter 4, there was this passage, a summary passage, after Jesus had already been out doing the ministry that he does of the kingdom, right? The gospel of the kingdom. And there's a summary passage where it says Jesus went to all of these cities, and it says that he healed their diseases. And then he says he healed them who were oppressed by demons, or the Greek
Yes.
word daimonizomai means they were demonized, meaning under the influence or under the power of a demon, but it still phrases it through the lens of healing. And we see
Mhm.
that because right after, in Matthew chapter 8, I think verse 17, it gives another kind of summary passage. And then it says that this was a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy in Isaiah 53, that he would bear our infirmities, he would heal our diseases, and he would, by his stripes, we are healed. So deliverance is just as much a part of the atonement, because it's a form of healing where Jesus
Yes.
restored the soul in the spiritual realm. So it is a form of healing, it's spiritual healing. And so what has to happen is we have to identify what are the roots of the brokenness that people are experiencing. So in the emotional realm, you may do things like counseling, you may do things like, praying for inner healing, for Jesus to touch people's souls, restore their identity. But sometimes the roots of people's soul problems is demonic. And so if the root of the issue is demonic, deliverance is the only answer, because you can't medicate, educate, or counsel a demon, but you also can't cast out human. So if the root of an issue is demonic, you have to deal with it in the spiritual realm, but often it's multifaceted.
That is so well put. So let me ask you this. Well, and first of all, let me say that I personally see that within the healing and helping ministry of counseling, that there is a space to welcome in inner healing, deliverance ministries. I don't think that these have to be separated out. I don't think that they have to be isolated islands. I think that within the work of God and the helping ministry, I think there is a place and a space for these, and they can work together. So as you're working with somebody, and let's say you're coaching somebody, and they want to work on their strengths and they get better, you start peeling back layers and you start seeing things surface. What are some of the telltale signs that give you an indication that this is more than trauma, this is more than history, that there is something spiritual going on here? What would be an indicator for you?
That's a great question. A lot of times with people that I work with, I find that they will struggle with intense, intrusive thoughts that are
Mm,
either sexual and perverted in nature, blasphemous in nature, and even suicidal. So I'll give you an example, right? There are more people than you would imagine. Well, obviously you would know because you're in the counseling world, but there are so many people who don't struggle with suicide ideation or feel depressed, but yet, every time they drive down the road, they hear this flashing, intrusive thought cross their mind: drive into a tree, drive off a
mm,
cliff, or they'll be standing next to a ledge and this random intrusive thought will cross their mind: jump off the ledge.
right.
And these people feel so ashamed because they're having these thoughts cross their mind, but they don't feel suicidal. They don't feel depressed. They're not having a mental health crisis. And yet they'll have these weird, random, intrusive thoughts, and it'll be like a leaky faucet in the back of their head: drip, 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 sexual thought, blasphemous thought, suicidal thought, or even murderous thoughts, thoughts of violence. So intrusive thoughts is a big one. Another big one I would say is things like sleep paralysis.
Mm,
So, with a lot of victims of people who've been sexually abused, you'll find that they'll have these experiences at night that often will never be shared because it's so shameful, where people will have demons come into their bedroom at night and they'll have these experiences of either being fondled or sexually abused, in some cases, even raped. And they'll have this feeling like they're pinned to the bed, they're paralyzed, they can't speak, they can't move, they can't say Jesus, and it'll be this terrifying, tormenting presence in their room at night. And these experiences sometimes are confusing because sometimes people feel like they're kind of halfway asleep, halfway awake. They're not exactly sure. They're in like a trance sort of state. But these experiences are often, to me, indicators, very common, that people are suffering with a demonic issue.
that's very insightful. What I have found is that many times someone who's dealing with past trauma, or they may have a substance use issue, they may have just a number of things going on in their life, maybe a history of mental illness. And I find that those can be open doors for spiritual warfare to occur, satanic attacks. So let's say that somebody is dealing with this. Maybe they have a history of abuse, they have a history of trauma. This has become an open door. Now they're dealing with a demonic attack. What is the remedy? I mean, in Christian faith, I understand we have the victory, we have the authority, but how do you put that into practice? Give me something extremely helpful, practical, therapeutic, because I think the people that are listening to this, we need more than just put on the armor of God. We need how do I contend in spiritual warfare effectively?
Yes. So let me frame this conversation based on a core principle called access, the principle of access. The way I'll frame it is like this: we are all spiritual beings living in a spiritual world. We are always giving away access. You don't get to choose if you give away access, you only get to choose to whom you give away access. So when you pick up a tool of the kingdom of darkness, like lying or cheating or sexual morality or whatever, you are giving access to the prince of darkness, the devil. But when you pick up tools of the kingdom of light, like prayer and obedience and confession and things that God tells us to do, those things give access to the king of light, to Jesus. And so in our lives, in our families, in our history, there are things in our experience that give away access to the enemy. And these access points allow demons to gain a foothold in your life. And if you don't deal with those access points and remove them, they can also develop and become strongholds. We see in Ephesians chapter 4 that it says, "Don't let the sun go down on your wrath, neither give a foothold to the devil." The Greek
Mm,
word there is topos, from which we get the word topography, and it literally can mean an inhabited place. And so what happens is we give access to the enemy. Sometimes it's not us, it's our parents, it's our grandparents. And so we have these open doors in the family bloodline that need to be addressed. And the key thing that needs to be dealt with is that demons gain access through sin. Now, there's three sources of sin. There's your sin, personal sin that you deal with or that you commit. There's the sins of the family in your family history that affect you, and then there's the sins that are committed against you, which
mm,
are like trauma, sexual abuse. And
sure.
these three different sources of sin give open doors to demons. So the practical pathway to removing demonic entities from your life is you have to remove the access points that gave demons the ability to afflict you. And for me, what I do with my clients is I have a practical inventory where I ask a set of questions based on certain categories that tend to give open doors to demons. For example, witchcraft. I ask them about witchcraft in their personal life, family history. I ask them about sexual immorality. So that's like fornication, adultery, molestation, if they've been sexually abused. I ask them things like bitterness, unforgiveness. Is there a lot of division or divorce in the family? Has there been any murders, suicides in their family history? And I go down a list of about 7 or 8 categories. And from what I discover about their life, their family history, and what's happened to them, then we begin to walk through them one by one and break those things off of them. We break curses, we renounce those practices from the family history. I help them repent of sins that they may not have been aware of that they'd even committed. And then from there, I engage in actual confrontation of the demons. And the reason why I do that is because if I just walk through their history, I break those access points and remove them, that doesn't mean I've actually cast out the demons. Okay. And in the Greek, we see when Jesus cast out demons, the Greek word is ekbalo, and it literally means to cast out an indwelling presence, demonic presence. And so sometimes people will just remove access points, but they won't actually cast the demons out. And so Jesus cast demons out. I cast demons out of people after I remove the access points so they don't have a right to return to that person. And that helps them get free.
So in this type of deep spiritual work, and I would say in all spiritual work, as we're talking about healing, whether it's counseling, inner healing, or deliverance, that it's best done with a guide. This
Yes.
this is work that you need assistance with. This is work that you need companionship with. This rarely is done or accomplished on your own by yourself. Many people want to do it yourself thing, right? They want to get through life and do life by themselves. And I've learned that there's a process whereby we are helped and that we mature, grow, and develop better with somebody else. And so, a threefold cord is not easily broken. And so we need to unite with somebody like you, Noah, or a counselor, or a pastor, or a therapist, or whoever. But deep spiritual work, deep spiritual healing calls for assistance. And so
Absolutely.
good, good, good stuff. Now, here's what I know. I know that there's a reality that we live in a spiritual realm and there is active spiritual warfare going on right now. It's undeniable. But then you also have individuals that they have a close communion with God. They're filled with the Spirit of God. They know the Lord, but they're still dealing with trauma from the past, hurts, disappointments, rejection, abandonment, abuse, whatever. On that side of it, when you don't have an indicator that there is a spiritual presence or a warfare taking place, but this person is just really wounded, and their woundedness is creating them to be kind of stuck, and they're reaching out for help. As a mental health coach and as a certified care counselor, what are some of the steps that you might walk an individual through on that front?
Yeah. So I use a process based on a book called Soul Care by Dr. Rob Reimer, Seven Transformational Principles for a Healthy Soul. And when I bring a client in, I usually have them buy the book, and the book covers deep root issues of the soul, seven root issues. So it covers identity, repentance, forgiveness, generational sin patterns, healing wounds. It deals with things like fear,
Fear.
shame, and the point of the process that I do is I walk them through these various layers to the soul that are root issues. Because what happens is people will come in feeling things like pain or confusion, or they'll feel just a sense of heaviness because of things like you just described, emotional things, traumatic things in their life, but they don't have the clarity on how these things have affected them in a deep level. So I want to help them first gain a level of self-awareness. And this
Mm.
process I do with patients or clients helps them to first gain a level of self-awareness through the things that the book covers at each topic, at each level. And from that self-awareness, now that we can diagnose some of the root issues in the emotional realm, then I'm able to actually give a therapeutic intervention of, hey, let's talk through that memory when your dad abused you as a child. Like, what was that like for you? And often tears will come to their eyes, pain will start to be unloaded. Sometimes if they have certain emotions that were blocked, those emotions will be revealed, and they'll recover some memories that were previously dissociated from. And so I will talk with them, I will walk with them through those memories and help them to connect some of the dots. But I like to frame the therapeutic approach that I use through a lens of 3 R's. So I look at it as remembering, revealing, and reframing. And then the
Great.
fourth R, which is a bonus star, is replacing. So remembering, we have to be able to remember these moments and walk and process them in order to release it. But revealing means you have to tell me, you have to talk
Mhm.
about it, you have to actually bring this stuff into the light, because the enemy gains power in these things when they're kept in the dark. But after we've remembered it, we've revealed it, we're talking through it, then we have to be able to reframe the past
Mm.
in order to make actual progress moving forward. Because often people have a very, very victimized view of their trauma because of the pain that they've suffered. But if they're able to see their past through a redemptive lens, they have a good shot at actually making progress and not letting the past stop them from their potential in their future. And from there, there often needs to be also the fourth R, which is replacement, replacing lies that they learned through their trauma with the truth, replacing bad mindsets, bad ways of coping with healthier ways of coping for the future when they feel stress or they feel shame, you know. And that replacement process is really where a lot of life change can happen, because they're actually starting to find God's ways of working through present struggles and future struggles, so they're not reverting back to old tendencies that they learned through their trauma.
That is just excellent. I love the fact that you are empathetic to the individual that you're working with and you want to hear and learn about them, but you're also giving a lot of tools and you're giving a lot of resources. You're framing your sessions with structure. And for a client, that's very helpful because they see, okay, here's where we're going. And so you definitely are expressing a very directive approach, which I think is refreshing. I think there has been a shift in psychology and counseling, especially for a long time, just to do a lot of listening and sitting with the individual, which is helpful and maybe in the beginning, especially to understand the individual that you're working with. But there has to be a place where you begin to guide on a journey to healing, restoration, and wholeness, or we kind of miss it, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, you're doing well in that area. I like that.
thank you. Yeah, I find that often there, like you're talking about with people, who are really heavy laden. I find that people often have nobody they can really talk to about the
Hmm.
pain, about the heartache that they've suffered. And there's a therapeutic element where endorphins are literally released just by them talking about what they've been through, and somebody who cares looking them in the eye, listening to them, and just giving them space. And it's great because from there they're feeling a sense of validation, like what they've been through is actually important. And then from there they're much more likely to actually want to learn, how do I overcome this stuff now? And so it's part of building rapport. It's part of giving them space to be able to actually grieve and process and sit with the emotions and learn to embrace God's presence and the pain. And then from there, those therapeutic approaches and interventions help them to actually make progress so they can actually not live under the weight of that for the rest of their lives. So I find it's both and it's really, really healing.
I love the fact too that when you're describing your approach and how you're ministering to individuals, that you are sprinkling some clinical language, some neuroscience in there. It tells me that you are not afraid of science, that you see where that the biblical student and the biblical counselor can be clinically informed, and we can use all truth to help a lot of people. So I'm glad that you're not living in the dark ages, but you're totally and 100% grounded in God's truth. And I love that.
Thank you, Tim. No, I think it's really important. As I think about the advances in science that have shaped our generation. And I think about the things that we've discovered about things like neuroplasticity and neurological pathways in the brain and how they can be rebuilt and reformed. That gives me incredible hope in the work that I do with clients, because when I, see a client come to me and they feel hopeless because they're stuck in a pornography addiction or another doom loop cycle of shame, and it feels so hard to break free from it, my understanding of the way that God designed our neurology and our brains is so encouraging and hopeful, because neuroplasticity gives me the hope that you can actually break previous neurological circuits in the brain and renew and create new neurological pathways so that you can actually not continue in the same patterns that have enslaved people for majority of their lives. And so I think, Dr. Lloyd, it's so important that we learn and we discover what God has revealed through the scientific revelations and discoveries we've gained, because they can only help us if we use them well through a biblical lens to help people experience freedom.
I love that. That just encourages me beyond what you can imagine. I love to hear a true child of God, a man of God that's committed to the scripture, yet understanding the science and where we're at today and how to incorporate that into healing ministry. So Noah, you're talking a lot too. You're making references here and there to addiction, the addiction of pornography, especially in that space. It sounds like you work with a lot of men and men's issues. I, for one, am concerned for this generation, this next generation of men. I think there are so many attacks on a young man's mind, and I think the accessibility to uh, pornography and that type of addiction is just everywhere. So, talk to me a little bit about where you see our current culture at, and what are some of the dilemmas that a young man might be battling with right now? And what are some answers for our young men?
Absolutely, Tim. Yeah, my heart at its core is to reach my generation, Gen Z, with the transformation, the healing, the freedom that I know they are desperate for. Our generation right now in Gen Z has surpassed all other generations in our recent history in mental health diagnoses. Literally, over 46% of Gen Z right now has been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, and 37% actually have said that they are undiagnosed with a mental health disorder. If you combine those two groups together, that's 83% of Gen Z that identifies them having some sort of mental health issue that is plaguing and afflicting them. Over 60% of Gen Z actually identifies as struggling with anxiety, and on a significant level. 40% confess to actually struggling with anxiety and loneliness and depression regularly, like at a high level on like a regular basis. And 18 to 61 of them, 18% or a little bit more, have actually been diagnosed with anxiety. And so anxiety is the number one mental health diagnosis right now in Gen Z. And the predominant reasons behind that are things like the pandemic that created tons of isolation in our generation. It's things like social media. You know, we're the first generation to actually grow up fully accessible to the iPhone and social media platforms, which has created tons of toxic comparison and shaming, and again more loneliness and isolation. And we have things like substance abuse that is on an all-time high, especially with the legalization of cannabis. A lot of Gen Z is self-medicating through things like pornography and drugs and alcohol. And what you'll find, interestingly enough, is there's also a lot of lies in our generation, especially like you mentioned, me working with men. Often men are told they are not supposed to feel emotions. They're not supposed to actually work through these emotional things. And yet statistics show in Gen Z that men are actually 4 to 5 times more likely to commit suicide than even women.
Mm. Wow.
Women are more likely to attempt suicide, but men are 4 to 5 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And right now in Gen Z, the leading cause of death is gun violence, and the second leading cause of death is suicide. Needless to say, we have a mental health crisis in Gen Z. But the good news, Tim, is that this is also the highest level in any generation that's currently living of people who've actually sought out therapeutic care and support and interventions where mental health is being destigmatized is in Gen Z. Gen Z is starting to become more aware. They're starting to actually address and try to, go to therapeutic sources for help and healing. And so that's a good news. We're seeing a trend upward and to the right in that arena. But what's discouraging is to see that there's so many at such a high level. The percentages are through the roof of those who are struggling, who are isolated and lonely, who don't know what to do about it.
That is so helpful, and you paint a picture. It's what I would call a grim reality. But let me ask you this, because you are Gen Z, what can a pastor, what can a ministry leader, what can the church do to better reach Gen Z? How can we help this next generation?
Absolutely. That's a great question. There are some really great resources out there. Like Pure Desire Ministries has an amazing resource that they do for helping youth and teens walk through things like pornography addiction recovery. They give resources to parents as well to have these kinds of hard conversations with children, and with youth and with young adults. So getting young people in front of modern resources that are really helpful that also like connect really well with the brain, with the mind of a young person really helps. There's a really great organization. It's a new organization called Fight the New Drug, and they I think they're a nonprofit, I'm not sure, but they released a docu-series called Brain Heart World that
Mm.
covers how pornography affects the brain, how pornography affects your relationships, and how pornography affects the world. And it's very modern, great content, very palatable for a person in Gen Z. I've watched the docu-series before. So the more we can get these kinds of resources into the hands of Gen Z and integrate them into our small group models, into our youth group sessions that we do together, having a lot of small group discussions surrounding these topics. These are things that I think can really help our generation, because Gen Z doesn't want to watch content from the 80s that is black
Right,
and white,
right,
that is
right.
all these statistics and stuff that's not really relatable. They want to hear from people that are their age, that are struggling, that are going through the same things. Gen Z is desperate for authenticity, for honesty, for people who are raw and real about the struggles, and also finding information that can somehow help them practically to overcome those challenges. So, Pure Desire, Fight the New Drug, Brain Heart World, these kinds of platforms, organizations have great resource material that you can integrate into small groups, youth groups, and things alike.
No, there is just no doubt in my mind that God has anointed you and raised you up for such a time as this. This is excellent. Are you open to also preaching out, speaking, teaching, doing that type of thing? Tell me about that side of your ministry.
Yes. So I'm very much open to that. I was a pastor at a local church in Englewood, Florida for over 2 years, where I would given opportunities to speak on Sunday mornings on various occasions, to speak and oversee small groups and stuff like that. I also oversaw a youth group and young adults ministry that I built from the ground up with our church to be able to help reach them in these various areas. We had young people that were struggling with LGBT and other forms of, abuse and struggles, and so I haven't recently gone and spoken on any of these subject matters, but yes, I've spoken on these things in the past. I'm very open and desiring to be able to use whatever platform God would give me to be able to speak on these various subjects, teach on these things, and help people to experience freedom and have the resources they need in order to actually pursue life change and help people on as broad a spectrum as possible. So, yes, very open to it. But that's kind of my background with that.
No, that's great. I think you must do that. You've got a message, you've got a heart for this. You can relate to Gen Z so much better than my generation. And so, man, I support you in that. And I know that you've done extensive training in ministry. Share a little bit about the preparation that has because you don't get to this point and you don't have uh, this burning message inside of you without a lot of preparation. You don't get to be able just to, talk about these things on the level that you're describing without a lot of, hard work and effort. So talk a little bit about your training and background.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Tim. Yeah, so I went to Nyack College, which became called Alliance University, and I received a Bachelor of Science degree in pastoral ministry, where I was trained and equipped in multiple levels of counseling, pastoral counseling, biblical counseling, where I was equipped and trained in multiple forms of psychological care and therapeutic interventions with various issues, but also from a biblical and pastoral lens. That was one of the beginnings of my training. And then after college, I became accredited with a denomination called the Christian and Missionary Alliance, from which I was able to serve on staff and be licensed in pastoral ministry. And in there, I was also going through multiple trainings. I did a lot of academic legwork through that ordination process that basically led me to be able to gain tons of training and tons of equipping and edification and how to do pastoral ministry well. And from there, I also actually became a student through the Telos Care organization, and I was able to actually become a certified care counselor, which you are the founder and president of. And I truly enjoyed that experience. I learned so much. I was very much trained from a trauma informed care standpoint on how to do biblical pastoral counseling with the psychological scientific lens also integrated. So the Telos Care certification to become a care counselor is truly great. I would recommend it to anybody who's looking to be equipped and trained in this kind of ministry to help and serve people in a hurting world. And so I went through that certification program. I became a certified care and counselor underneath the IABE from Telos Care, which was great. And I'm currently right now pursuing a mental health coaching certification through the American Association for Christian Counselors, the AACC, which is under Light University. And so that is kind of the scope of where my training has come from the technical academic standpoint. But the training that really sets you up for success in ministry and in success in this kind of work, you really have to be in the weeds, doing the work with people on
Yes.
the ground, meeting people, getting to hear people's stories, starting to connect dots for yourselves where all of these things start to kind of fit together like a puzzle piece to really understand the way all of this stuff works. And so that's really been quintessential to where I'm at now.
That is wonderful. I see a bright future for you. And now you're building a practice whereby you are helping and working with folks. And so you are full fledged in ministry. So tell the folks how to get in contact with you and And how would people connect with you?
Yes. So my website is healingwellspring.com. And my social medias on Instagram, it's healingwellspring.co. I'm on TikTok as well, Healing Wellspring. And I'm also on Twitter. You can find me on X. You can find me on Facebook at Healing Wellspring. And basically, that's what I do. I coach people in areas of inner healing, deliverance, pornography addiction recovery, anxiety, shame. Again, mental health coach, certified care counselor. Those are the areas you can find me. And I would love to connect with you therein and be able to support anybody in any way that I can to experience the freedom Jesus paid for.
That's wonderful. I think this has been a great conversation, and I just wanted to broaden the conversation to inner healing and deliverance, in addition with the mental health and the counseling and the trauma background. There's so much to consider because we are complex individuals, and I think we live in a age that really calls for all all ministers within the kingdom of God to connect together and to share resources and to share strengths. And I think this is vital. So God bless you, Noah. This has been a fantastic conversation. I just wish you the best in your journey, and I know that God has a big plan for your life. So God bless you, and I appreciate everybody for jumping in on this podcast today. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. It's been great being with you.
Thank you for listening to the Telos Care podcast. We hope today's conversation encouraged you to reach in and grow, and reach out to bring hope and healing to your community. Hit follow on social media to stay up to date, and hit subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode.